today we are continuing on the topic of optimizing our brain health. Just got this wonderful quote from Sister Ellen G. White from the Councils on Health 616.2, and it says that our brain is our only medium, as you can see there in the red font. So we need to protect it from whatever can disturb the circulation and whatever that lessens the strength of the vital powers. So we need to keep our blood pure so that we can be free from brain fog and listen and communicate with God more effectively. You know, we learned last week from Dr. Stan how we need to prepare ourselves for Jesus' soon coming. And glorifying God with our bodies is definitely one way. And one of the most common food that is wreaking havoc in our bodies and especially in our brains today is hybridized wheat. So growing up, we never heard of wheat allergies or gluten intolerance or IBS or celiac. And I'm especially confident that those that are older than me can also testify to that as well. So, 40, 50 years ago, you didn't hear of it much. But now it's so common, and we only need to look at our local supermarket and see how the gluten-free section is. But how did this occur? Didn't God create wheat? So did God create something bad? No, of course not. And so today's health nugget is one of two part series on wheat. And we'll look at how modern wheat came to be. So a history lesson for some of us, and as well as even for myself as I learnt this recently. So we'll start with Genesis 1:29 to 31. And you can see there, in the beginning, we see that God created every plant yielding seed. And in the end, God looked at everything he had made and it was very good. In the beginning, God created wheat that was very good. And this original wheat is known as inkhorn. And this was the wheat talked about in the Bible. Nurse and naturopath Barbara O'Neill state that the original wheat, inkhorn, has a very fragile protein structure or gluten structure. And you can see that it's this one right here. And it has 14 chromosomes. It was then cross-pollinated with a wild grass, as you can see the next, and it formed the Emma wheat form of wheat there. And this Emma is not as fragile as inkhorn, but it's definitely fairly just digestible. And so combining two of these, now the plant has 28 genes. And grains have been at the heart of humankind's diet for many thousands of years, but in the last few generations, something has gone wrong with wheat. And I pray that this is where you can try and connect the dots. So the way we have grown it, the way we process it, and the way we eat it, and the very wheat itself that God has made has changed. Since industrialization, everything has changed, and it has happened in two distinct technology revolutions. And today I'll be talking about the one that's caused a massive impact on our health. This revolution, the first one, was called the Green Revolution, and that's because it was to do with cultivation and farming. And this world, the wheat crop, has now been hybridized, which was in the 1950s and 60s. The father of the movement, Norman Borlaug, was actually awarded the Nobel Peace Prize as he helped create a type of wheat that grew bigger and therefore made more flour. So now farmers could grow 10 times more wheat in 1 acre of land. And he was also praised because by doing this, he helped save 1 billion lives, as during that time it was a great starvation crisis. But as well as during that time, no one actually really questioned or addressed the health impacts that this new wheat created, as they were all busy, happy, with the money they created. And now this wheat has 42 chromosomes, which is this one right here. And it has a bigger genetic load and information. So, with all this information, and the genetic load, so many different proteins in there, very highly complex, and only a cast iron stomach can digest. So in comparison with einkorn, which is the very top, which has a higher percentage of gluten than this wheat, it was a lot easier to digest. This modern wheat and hybridized wheat is a lot more complex to digest. And you can see that with this new farming technology, it was propagated around the world. And by the 1990s, more flour could be used and made, and it became the upward trend of how cakes and biscuits and cookies and pastas and pies and pretzels went around the world, and it entered our diets. And so now scientists are starting to connect modern wheat and its complex gluten structure with all the manner of chronic, digestive, and inflammatory diseases. So when gluten was hybridized, and when this wheat is ingested, it can actually overstimulate our immune system and cause a misbalance in our gut. So when it enters, this complex structure is actually, like I mentioned, less digestible, and it becomes a peptide called glutamorphine, which we know morphine is an opioid derivative, and it gets into the blood and into our brains. And then it gets picked up, and there's actually several studies that are now showing this link with mental health and the gluten from hybridized wheat. These conditions are known, like depression, schizophrenia, and anxiety and bipolar. And so you can see the difference as to how the original wheat was made, and you can see how smaller it is compared to the modern wheat there. So digesting gluten can have a variety of effects in our body. And for me, it was definitely brain fog and bloating, which is very uncomfortable. And you can see the signs and symptoms of gluten intolerance there on the left, and as well as wheat allergy, which is skyrocketing at the moment as well, and especially with the asthma and the eczema, and like I said, with the bloated stomach. So this gluten is, like I said, found in hybridized wheat and as well as rye and barley, and it's causing so much issues as well, not just from the hybridized wheat, but the monocropping. So they are creating tons of wheat in one section, and then they're using a lot of pesticides, and not rotating the crops. And so this wheat is grown in poor soils and obviously lacks the nutrition that we need. And as well as using pesticides like glyphosate, which, as you can see there, have been trending from the 1990s, which is when it all pretty much started, and it's skyrocketing now. And this is the celiac disease, just for an example. And so, unfortunately, Satan has destroyed what God originally created that was for good. And you can see in this quote here that Satan gathered the fallen angels together to devise some way of doing the most possible evil to the human family. One proposition after another was made till finally Satan himself thought of a plan. He would take the fruit of the vine, also wheat, and other things given by God as food, and would convert them into poisons which would ruin man's physical, mental, and moral powers, and so overcome the senses that Satan should have full control. Through perverted appetite, the world would be made corrupt. But we praise God because even till now, einkorn is still available, but unfortunately it is quite expensive in New Zealand. But it is better to get whole grains, like a few weeks ago I talked about quinoa and oats, to replace this hybridized wheat, and they're gluten-free as well. And although Satan has tainted humanity with sin and tainted God's original food, we praise God for Jesus because, he came not only to save us eternally, but physically as well. And this is why we have the health message. It's so full of wisdom and healing, and some of you may even have these symptoms that I showed, but now we can know the cause, and we can do something about it. So next time, we won't be sharing next week as we have a special program. But after that, I'll be sharing the second part of the series where I'll be talking about whole wheat and the confusion that's brought as well into our society. But for now, my prayer is that with the light that's been given, that you spend time with God and ask Him what He wants you to do personally. You know, He winks at our ignorance, and all of this information that I personally learned myself, you know, was definitely a shock, and it was definitely a struggle, but I praise God because He is able. So just want to close off with Romans 12 verses 1, and it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, and this is your true and proper worship." So if we are willing, God can work in us, and step by step He will help us. This is a journey that I've been on, and hopefully that you guys will go on too. You know, it's not overnight, it's a process. And, you know, especially as a baker, it was, like I said, hard, but step by step, learning about the different flours, like the whole grains that you can see there. But we need to be willing first. So I praise God that He's also surrounded me with a church family who introduced me to the health message, and now be able to give you support. So for anyone that wants any support, you know, we do offer recipes, and as well as health coaching, and even just prayer and encouragement for those that have just want to, you know, get less bloating, or, you know, just remove that brain fog. And also with the 10-day Daniel plant-based challenge, feel free to come and see me after the service. And yeah, let's surrender self and follow His leading to prepare our bodies and minds for His soon return. God bless.